Hi, I'm at the guy. I'm gonna start saying that my original Explain History Godzilla, with such high praise from my reviews, decided to do a redo, and now I'm doing one again. This time, I actually am going to continue on adding on to it, since that's my redos of Explain Histories are. On the adding things that never were previously. We start our story in today of Tokyo, Japan, of the atomic bomb of Hiroshima and Nagasaki of 1945. That's right, 1945. A atomic bomb was put on there, and obviously Japan. Obviously, this was a horrifying yet well-known thing about Japan. This was so well known that some filmmaker decided to plan a movie to make a giant monster represent this thing. And a decade after, this movie with a giant monster was released, called Godzilla, or as we say in America, Godzilla. But it wasn't always planned to be this way. Originally, the inception of Godzilla was supposed to be a giant octopus, but later it became known that he needed to make it an aquatic lizard. He based on design and got a certain someone for a suit for it. Used as special effects for a man in a suit. Originally stop motion, but man in a suit. This thing of Godzilla was pretty much so iconic that we America decided to have it re-released here as Godzilla King of the Monsters. It was so successful it got a follow-up certain amount of months later. 1955, Godzilla Raids Again, or Gigantus, the Fire Monsters. Here we have another Godzilla. That's right, because in the first, the Godzilla in the original movie has been killed off by the Oxygen Destroyer by someone named Dr. Sarasala. And such, another Godzilla appears, this time fighting against a monster called Anguirus. A giant monster with spikes on his back. Of course, when he wins, this Godzilla then was buried into ice. But 7 years after, he busts free, going against another next movie where he faces against King Kong in King Kong vs. Godzilla. This movie ends with him and King Kong plummeting into the ocean. After that, we then see another batch of films this Godzilla appears in. This one appears in Mothra vs. Godzilla, King Ghidorah the Three-Headed Monster, Invasion Monster Monster, Godzilla vs. the Sea Monster, Son of Godzilla, where his annoying son Manila appears, Destroy All Monsters, which is meant to be his last movie, Godzilla's Revenge, strange name, Godzilla vs. Hedorah, where he uses his atomic breath to fly for some reason, Godzilla vs. Gigan, Godzilla vs. Megalon, using the flying kick, Godzilla vs. Mechagodzilla, and Terror of Mechagodzilla. This era of films was called the Showa era. After that, it took a near a decade. But this was a near a decade that wasn't expected. Meet Godzilla 1984, or The Return of Godzilla. This was another Godzilla, but not the same Godzilla from... Not the Godzilla formerly from Rage Against to Terror Mega Godzilla. No. This was a entirely different Godzilla by general means. That's right. Godzilla 1984, or Return of Godzilla, is actually a reboot to the series. The first in a long while. This reboot movie ignores all the other previous films except for the original. And trust me, they've been... And this Godzilla is pretty much continuing on in their films as in Godzilla vs. Biollante, Godzilla vs. King Ghidorah, Godzilla vs. Mothra, Godzilla vs. Mechagodzilla 2, Godzilla vs. Space Godzilla, and finally being killed and having his last appearance in Godzilla vs. Destroyer. After that, we have another few-year break. But before that happens, before these films were planned, in the 80s, there was an attempt to make an American Godzilla film. That didn't happen. Next, it was tried again in the next decade, where it was a film where Godzilla was facing against someone called the Griffin. And thus, but that never worked either. Thus, the idea went to TriStar, and when they tried the attempt, let's just say plans sort of were different. They hired a director named Roman Emmerich, who thought of the idea of not really having a dead Godzilla movie, but he had no choice, and thus the existence of Godzilla in 1998. This Godzilla has its own continuity, where the only continuation of this Godzilla was his TV series. Yeah, this was the first one of the Godzillas where his continuity was not connected to the original. And thus, this one, thankfully was given a nickname called Geno, or Godzilla in name only. Later, after the use of this version of Godzilla inspired, the name was changed to just Zilla, which definitely is a name they finally deserve, because this guy is definitely not be a Godzilla. This guy is definitely just a Zilla. And like it said, it's like they took the god out of him. Next, Toho came back, but this time they named in the next movie Godzilla 2000. This one was another reboot, ignoring all the other previous films except for the original. So this was another reboot in continuity. That's right, it's another new Godzilla. The next one was also a reboot, Godzilla vs. Megaguirus. This time it's sort of a what-if scenario, like what if the original Godzilla still lived, and thus another reboot continuity. Lowers all the other films except for the original. There was another reboot in continuity. This time Godzilla GMK. This time, yes, it ignores all the other films except for the original. And this Godzilla is like, he's like a combined spirit because he was. This Godzilla from G&K has sort of became a combination of ghosts of the World War II victims. No, I'm not kidding. Yes, it's the Godzilla series. Just roll with it. The next set of, and then we have the next Godzilla movie, which was another rebooted timeline. This rebooted timeline does not just ignore the other films except for the original. This time it's connected to many different types of movies. This continuity was called the Kiryu Saga. And this time it was another movie that followed the original movie, and this Godzilla also had a Mechagodzilla of his own, which was the Bones original Godzilla put into this new Mechagodzilla. This continuity Godzilla films continues on in the next movie, Godzilla Tokyo SOS. Next was the Godzilla movie called Godzilla Final Wars, except it doesn't connect to the original, nor any of the films that came before it. This is also its own continuity. Finally, the series will take another decade of rest. It will take another decade to finally continue on the series. See, there were plans that the next one would be Godzilla 3D. However, after a while, it needed to take a decade. However, one film was planned, and that movie was going to be connected to the cinematic universe. The teasers and trailers set this up, and it was going to be very interesting what they were going to do. This one was just called Godzilla, released in 2014, and it was the start of a cinematic universe called the Monsterverse. This Godzilla from his continuity is not really anywhere connected to the original, nor the other films. This starts out with the 2014 movie. Next, it was also announced that there was another Godzilla film, this one being Shin Godzilla. It was its own continuity, and there were no other films connected to it. But then something else happened. Something very interesting. Godzilla, Planet of the Monsters, the start of the anime trilogy, and pretty much we had a couple of Godzillas in this movie. We have the smaller Godzilla who ends up being killed, and the much larger 300-meter Godzilla. The small Godzilla was called Godzilla Phileas, and the bigger one was called Godzilla Earth. This Godzilla Earth has his movie series, or trilogy, continue on into the continuity with Godzilla City on Edge Battle and Godzilla Planet Eater. Next became Godzilla King of the Monsters, a continuation of the Godzilla Monsterverse, a follow-up to the 2014 film, as well as Godzilla vs. Kong. However, another different thing happened, a thing that never happened before in another few years. Another Godzilla movie came out called Godzilla -1. This one was sort of a prequel, so this Godzilla was sort of a precursor to the original. However, there were no other films connected to it, and thus another different continuity. And then finally, we had the Godzilla movie that to finish off the continue on the Monsterverse with Godzilla X Kong, the New Empire. And next is the next movie in the MonsterVerse, Godzilla X Kong Supernova, which retains Space Godzilla. I'm at the Comic Guide. See you on the 8th. And see you on the 8th. Bye.